Ladies and gentlemen, it is DebateSensei. We are Wednesday. We got ourselves Tim TV for Resolutions. We got Matt Shapiro Esquire.
We're getting weird tonight.
And I am Jared Kapika Miller, your debate coach. All right, professor of communications. All right, so
Captain, my captain
here. What we're talking about today is we got a couple of things. Oh, looks like I'm dropping out a little bit. Oh, that's too bad. That's too bad. All right. So I got a challenge that for a couple of my students, and hopefully they'll be able to catch this topic. All right. But I'm going to broadcast a topic for them, and they're going to start preparing it. We're going to have a debate at 8:30. So right after we're done with this, we're gonna do that. Here it is. Okay, they want to kind of understand a little bit more about metaphor topics. Here's a metaphor topic for you. What do you do with a topic like this? All is fair in love and war. So that's your topic. All right, talking to my students right now. There it is. It's on the screen.
There it is.
I don't think everyone's
so why is this metaphorical?
When we get there, we'll.
Let me repeat my question. Why is this metaphorical?
Because it doesn't. I think we're breaking up a little bit.
You're good. I can hear you fine.
So Matt Knight, it's
okay.
We'll just go here and Jared can jump back in. But so all is fair in love and war is not like a call to action, right? It's not necessarily even like a comparison of values. I suppose you could maybe contend it's something of like a fact round. So you get to decide, like what we've talked about before in our trichotomy topic, of what kind of resolution this is and how we're going to debate it. But it's not talking about a specific policy, right? Or it's not talking about comparing one ideology even necessarily versus another, or saying something is good or bad. So all is fair in love and war. I've seen this topic in rounds before, and normally I've seen it broken down into contentions where it's just various examples, each explaining some thesis that is pulled from it. So it's almost like an impromptu where you take this quotation and say, this is what it means, and then here's a bunch of examples of why it means that thing. And then the other side, you frame it as the other side can debate against, it meaning what we believe it to mean.
One thing that just off the top, a metaphor, I think, metaphor means something other than what it says. That's what a metaphor is. If I say Jared is a flower, that means it could mean he literally has petals and a stem and he's a flower, or it could mean something else, right? So that something else is up for interpretation. And Tim, you just hit on it. What I wanted to mention is tricot is kind of relevant here because you get to interpret this however you want. And you could say it's a fact debate, and you could hit this literally. You could say, hey, love means marriage and people fight in marriage, and war is killing people and people fighting that. And so it's literally a fact, like you said. You could argue a policy as well. Jared and I were speaking before this started. Oftentimes there may be some sort of conflict brewing that's kind of current event in the news. And you could maybe reasonably infer that all is fair in love and war means that we should enact some policy or declare war, for instance, or something to that effect, because of the nature of love and war, which you would have to define. Or you could argue value. The interpretation part of the metaphor is what I wanted to talk about, and how that applies to definitions and tricot and a lot of the framework arguments that we were talking about the last few weeks.
So, usually what you do is you could look at the context in which this idea came about. There's and how people use it. All right. So I think when they're talking about metaphor resolutions, one of the first things you ought to do is see how people use this phrase. And it's just oftentimes used in the context of excusing behavior that's normally
extreme. Yeah.
or unfair, right? It's kind of like that. That's improper behavior. But you're like, well, all's fair in love and war. You know, like, oh, how dare you steal my girlfriend? It's like, well, all's fair in love and war. You know what I mean?
You've hurt me in the acts of love that you've created, or you know, often we say that the ones who are closest to you or love you and you love are the ones who give power to hurt you, and that's kind of an element of love. And so, you know, that's the aspect I think we're talking about. Unless you're a really bloodthirsty person and see the good aspects in war and define fair as being good or something like that. But I think there's a negative connotation to this, meaning people do things justifiably in the name of love and then in the name of war. Equally,
I mean, they excuse it though. So you kind of say it's like, you know what, and so you would have to defend that excuse of poor behavior. You're
on the
like,
AF.
Yeah, on the affirmative. Like, I think that's where the debate comes in, and it's kind of a difficult burden to do. Now, you could break it down into specific case areas, right? Like, like if you want to do something current event based, the first thing I think of is like Harry and Meghan.
Oh, I went way trashier. I immediately was like Kim and Kanye. Like, they're breaking down. And people are taking sides, and now we've got to discuss this. That's me. My mind went. You're a little higher brow there, Jared.
And I'll take the neg, and we can talk about, you know, genocide in various parts of the world that are happening. So,
like a lot of people are saying, it's like, oh, Harry and Meghan are out of line for, you know, doing a Oprah interview, and you know, some people are kind of like, and I think a response is like, well, all is fair in love and war. So they love each other, so they do them. Harry loved his mom, and so I would consider that almost like him at war with the media.
And going on Oprah is extreme and reckless behavior, right? I think that's the other, you know.
Like, and normally that's considered out of bounds. Like, you know, a royal shouldn't be doing that, but screw it, all's fair in love and war. You know what I mean? And so, and so, you know, you can contextualize it and say, listen, we're going to say that Harry and Meghan, that we're going to defend Harry and Meghan. The opposition could say that they were out of line, and whoever at the end that you think is right, you vote for.
Yeah, and you know, on the neg, just to even just Jared presenting his AF, you know, there's a line where I don't know if I would ride or die on procedurals saying that you've defined me into a peg that I can't know about, because that argument is much weaker, in my opinion, in a resolution like this, because to some extent, you're forced to anticipate knowing that you will have likely no idea what the other team is going to say. But but it goes both ways. You know what I mean? And that's kind of where you could spend all of your time in this round arguing topicality. Okay. But I'm just, if I were judging that round, I mean, you better have the greatest tea of all time, but because honestly, knowing this resolution before I walk in the room, it's like you're going to likely hear two completely opposite opinions, and you're going to have to listen to why theirs is more significant in this round because this resolution, you know, so because as far as some of the procedurals we've talked about in the last few weeks and months and years, I don't even want to think about it, but that might be a weaker argument here. Unless, of course, someone is truly still, you could technically
don't run to a metaphor. It's stupid. Don't do it. It's a bad idea. Don't do it.
Think about this on the negative now, right? It's like, okay, you might be able to think about like defining all, but like again, I would urge you to go with how it's normally used, and you say, okay, like you have to they have to explain how a certain behavior is normally out of bounds or off limits, and somebody violated that and they are defending it. And so maybe the Harry and Meghan one kind of meets it, but you kind of go, people have done this before and they defended her before, you know what I mean? And so, and that was fine. But you have to be a little bit more big picture on the neg, in my opinion. So when you're saying all is fair in love and war, you're like, no, there are certain things.
You have such good ground. I just brought up genocide earlier, but like you have so much ground on both sides, right? Like all is fair in love and war. You could talk about how you could, on AF, hey, you got to put stuff aside to stay in a strong marriage. And you could give a whole debate on that if that's what you wanted to do. And you probably could win if you could make it important. On the neg, nothing justifies genocide. Period.
Yeah.
Like you can, and now this debate comes down to these two things, and that's okay.
But I think you want to stay a little bit on the metaphorical level, though, like on the neg. You know what I mean? It's like you
I like going literal.
Yeah,
I like going like straight literal. Yeah.
Tim?
It's not your responsibility. Like, you don't get the privilege of defining the topic on the neg.
Yeah.
So if the other side parametricizes down to like, this is what we're talking about,
Yeah.
you got to talk about those things. And certainly you can expand outside of it, but it's intentionally muddling the debate. If the other side says, hey, we're talking about this and here's the thing, and you're like, but genocide, they have to defend genocide.
Yeah.
No. I mean, if in our fake round that I just set up for us, like, you could argue how the effects of genocide outweigh the
Right,
you could still do your impact calculus and all that.
You have to go that route, because then you're putting all your eggs in that one basket. I would urge people to have a general principle on the negative. Is like, there are some things that are just wrong. You know what I mean? There are some things that you should not do. All right.
Okay.
And so, and like the example for war is genocide, but the example
You're almost fighting the word all.
But
you're fighting the word all.
Yeah. But the example maybe for Harry and Meghan would be something else, something more comparable to that level of discourse.
Qualifier.
Right? Yeah. And so like that. So what you do is you apply that concept, your thesis, to whatever example they bring up, and then see what your ground looks like, and then argue it. That's what you should be doing.
I want to be clear. Like, I've sat through plenty of rounds and probably have been participated in a few myself, where there's a term we use in debate. Hopefully you've heard of it. Maybe you haven't. Two ships crossing in the night, right? And that means, if an AF goes up and gives an AF, and the neg goes up and gives a completely separate neg, and there's absolutely no interaction by the neg with the AF and then the subsequent member speeches, if there are those, when you put a judge in a place where they're just voting on two separate issues and there's no interaction, that, in my opinion, and I think all of our opinion, that's a bad debate, right? There's one of the arts that we do, what separates us, for instance, from IEs, is the interaction. You're supposed to have you're supposed to think about what the other person said and specifically call them on it. I say the 4-point refutation, as Tim and Jared have always bring up, like, that is required to win. And so don't just say a completely separate case. You do need to tie it together.
Let's take a look at another topic.
Yeah, we have a bunch of these, so let's do it.
So take a look at this one. This one's cool.
So I've seen in topics like this, and Jared, tell me what you think. I've seen where teams will use several examples of whatever the thesis is. Yeah, different examples. So it's not we're just debating Harry and Meghan. Like, here's a few different things in Love and War. But this one I think is a much even better fitting for a multi-example debate, because this is, you could narrow this down to be a fact round. And like, we're going to give lots of historical examples of when that hasn't worked. And then the other side can give up a whole ton of counterexamples. So like, this one I think lends itself to the preponderance of evidence kind of standard that typically goes hand in hand with fact rounds. So what do you feel about using like a variety of examples to frame a debate?
I think that's fine. I've seen better debates that focus in on a little bit more, on a case analysis, a single case analysis, where it's still broad enough where the opposition has ground, and it usually is a contemporary it's a contemporary debate in current events that kind of matches what this is talking about. I would urge people, when you get this, is the first thing you do is Google it. You know what I mean? It's like, what does this mean? And just look up the history behind this statement, and that becomes part of your resolutional analysis. Like, this was a saying from Audre Lorde, a Black lesbian feminist who was basically talking about how using capitalist structures in order to protest capitalism won't work. And so
Because someone ends up making money, and then it just turns into a feeding hole for that person.
Right, and so that's be what I'd say it is. It's kind of like you can have a debate about capitalism.
And I want to jump in here and say, Jared is right. I think you need to know the context of a phrase. If you read a phrase, for instance, a resolution like this, and you think, for instance, that this is just something that the framers made up, I would double check, because if it does have some context, you're going to want to know what that is. With that said, what I said at the beginning, metaphors are literally by definition mere interpretation. And so for as true as it is that you want to stick in with what history has always said this means, don't be afraid to argue that and say that something overrides. Don't let some other team say just because this is a historical context means it must be. I've been in that position myself where you find yourself kind of going like, well, I was trying to be not even necessarily tricky. Maybe you truly, when you read it, you're like, hey, this could mean something else. There's a good faith amount of good faith in that. And I think, divorcing.
Yeah, I think the resolution analysis, if you just, if you just kind of look at, you could look at how the origins is one way. That's the origins,
yes.
But also how it's used now.
Yeah.
Because
the
way it's used now is like almost opposite of what the original intention was. The original intention was to be revolutionary and to be, and stuff like that. And now it's actually kind of counter-revolutionary.
Just to go to one of the more extreme examples in my mind, just reading this resolution, we talk about how often people jump to policy. They want to force feed things into policy because they're most comfortable in policy. This reminds me of a nuclear arms argument. Like whether you're banning nuclear war, if there's some current, legislation that you're aware of that you're like, this is, or sorry, if you're on the AF, maybe it's pro nukes because the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Or you could go neg and say, hey, we need to ban nukes. This is a policy debate. Nuclear bombs are the master's tools and they could completely destroy the master's house. So, there are ways to interpret these resolutions, which Tim's face is telling me now, like, he's like, yeah, it's a stretch, right? But like, that's okay. First of all, as long as you back up what you say, don't let people's faces make you feel one way or the other. That's a lesson in itself.
Don't let Tim's face get in the way of debate.
Hey, everything. Unfortunately, everything on here is a learning opportunity, and I just feel like talking about it. But my point is just to say that like that funnels down to tricot. I don't even know if Tim was making that face because of me. This cat is walking by. So, but just know that that's important. I need to open this up bigger for this one.
If it includes, yeah.
I have seen some literal interpretation rounds, though. I've seen where that really becomes.
Yeah, you
can actually have a significant enough debate on it, like
literally.
Yeah. But I mean, it's like the thing is, it's supposed to be a freaking meta. Like I took it out of a section that said metaphor. Boom, and then they're like, "All right, now we have to take this literally," and you're like,
I mentioned
irony. Like, are we going to go through all the tropes here, or what?
No, I mentioned last week. Everyone should watch that episode too, where I mentioned, United States and Russia are growing cold. Right, that is a metaphor, right, Jared? What is the metaphor?
Well, it's referencing the Cold War.
Meaning
that there was like proxy wars. There wasn't any actual direct violent conflict,
but hostilities are growing colder.
Superpowers. It was all in proxy wars.
And Nolan, to your point, we lost the round. It was reckless, but you could take it. I took it literally, and I walked up and said, "Hey, global warming."
Yeah.
When you say the United States is a place on Earth and Russia is a place on Earth and it's growing cold, that's factually inaccurate because literally it's getting warmer. So the ice caps are melting, and I love that part. I love going literal. I think if you can do that, especially on the neg, if that's what you want to do, or the AF, do it and just run with it. But make sure you follow the fundamentals and build out your arguments and respond to arguments because you can still lose.
I think it's the part where Jared says, "Don't do that."
Yeah,
Hey, it's opinion.
Yeah, it depends. You know what I mean? Like if you're on the neg and it seems to work for that one particular situation, then I mean it's kind
They're all unique. They're all unique.
It's kind of funny. I mean, sometimes you want to go really like ironic with it. You know what I mean? Then that's fine.
But it's not ironic. It's like the opposite of ironic. It's like this is literally what I've been told scientists are saying according to the news. There's my citation.
The fact that you're going literal when it's clearly metaphorical is ironic.
But it's debatable as well, right? I mean, there's no question. Let's go a couple more of these.
Yeah.
Jared prepared quite a bit, so let's
I like
speed round.
Good.
This is what Aristotelian, Platonian, something like that.
Platonian?
Who's the watcher? The watchers. I think it's Pluto. He believes. Plato. Excuse me. Plato. Plato believes in the perfect society with the watchers. What does it mean?
It was originally, I think the original was like who would guard the guards, and then now it's like who would watch the watchers. And I think the most famous reference is the Watchmen. It's the comic, the graphic novel turned movie, and it's about a bunch of superheroes that are just pretty much
Connery.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them that are just corrupt. You know what I mean? It's like, and so the question is like, when you got a bunch of superheroes that are doing whatever the hell they want, who do they answer to? You know what I mean? And so the question is and so now this is all a metaphor about tyranny. If you have a tyrannical government, like how you hold them accountable? And so you could draw, correlations between that and like what we're experiencing now, or maybe
literally,
what we were experiencing a few months ago or something like that. You know what I mean? It's like those are ways that you could kind of carry it from. So like literally the word metaphor, means to transfer. That's it's like a way of carrying water, and so it's like the meaning carries from these words to this idea. Yeah. And so when it's who would watch the Watchmen, it's like we don't have the proper systems of checks and of accountability for our leaders. Our leaders are not,
or even police. I mean, just to jump into police or
this house that tends to lend itself a little bit more towards policy, because you get an actor, you get some implication of what is going to happen or what should be done. So usually this house I see lending itself to policy rounds.
I mean,
but it's a metaphor. Yeah. So like this one's easy.
You need to define your own policy.
Again,
body cameras.
I love how I'm in the middle of Jared and Tim because I agree with both of you, right? Tim, to what he's saying, Tim, we were talking a few weeks ago about how the word should or ought to often means policy. When you see words like this house, that by inference means you're in some legislative body almost. I mean, it doesn't, but you could argue everything's up to argument, right? But Jared, to your point, this does not say this house would vote in the Green New Deal. Yeah. It does not say something it does not say it would defund the police. It does not say anything like that. So there is interpretation. And I mean, could you spin this into a value just because I don't know the answer to that?
No. If I were doing this one, I would just say like we're gonna watch the Watchmen, like literally watch by video cameras. We are going to put body cameras on all police.
But that's very literal for someone who literally was just telling me not to go too literal with things. That's like we are going to watch the people who make watches. That's what who have certain generals.
Plan, like your plan doesn't need to be metaphorical. The point is that the topic is metaphorical. Like you don't need to maintain metaphor throughout the entire thing. What's
the next one? Let's go. Let's spin it. I know you made like 20 of these.
Okay,
things.
Here's a tough one. A tough one. Okay.
This is a good lesson that we could talk about for 30 minutes by itself, by the way. There's a part of debate where you need to give up and just remember you surrender and everything. Something might happen. We can figure it out. Quit these pretentious things and just punch the clock.
So I still feel that this is a call to action, at least if I were interpreting it in our own app. This is still
This is policy
guide, right? This is this is not an interrogative statement. It's not a question, right? It's a declarative. Like
this is like rejoin Paris Climate Accord. That's what this is asking us to do. There's no way to interpret this otherwise.
So these pretentious things, and pretending like we know what the hell we're talking about with metaphors, and just punch the clock is like churn out content for good public speaking courses. So shut off this number, right? But I think whenever there are different kinds of metaphors, certainly, and I think some are more of a call to action than others. I would contend that this one is more of a call to action, and I would then take that into more of a policy direction. So I think that does not lend itself quite as cleanly to a value necessarily. I would prefer to take that in a policy direction.
I don't want to digress too hard from debate, but like this quotation literally reminds me of like, you ever had a partner who just can't stop doing research and doesn't write the card or doesn't write the case? I've had it in law school too, where I find people will worry. For instance, I think where it stems from we are all arrogant, we are all narcissistic, but there's this part of everyone who thinks we're writing these perfect arguments that if I just did a little more thinking and a little more research, it's going to be more perfect. There's an element where it's like, you need to do what is asked of you. You need to prepare a speech and you need to deliver it. And there's an element of research that goes into that, but there's a surrender where you go, okay, I've done some research. I formulated my plan. I'm starting to practice my debates. Like on the AF, that sentiment kind of lends to it. Stop thinking you're so great. Don't be so pretentious. Just do the activity. Do a good job. Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots. Just do your job. Don't be great.
Just
do your job.
I agree with that. It's at some point it's like, and even as a judge, I'm kind of like, okay, like your method for coming up with a debate is different than mine. I don't care as long as you put together a debate.
Now, we've also had a discussion where Jared lost the greatest round of his life because he said he did not fear it. And he was like, dude, not because of, but maybe have contributed a factor. That is kind of where you punch the clock and you should have maybe been more like, hey, this is like a heavy duty, just to teach a lesson here. I'm not trying to rip your heart apart here, but
the method,
there's a neg argument. There's a neg argument.
The method that I'm suggesting, though, is to treat the metaphor as a single unit and see how that is used. And the only time that this phrase is used is in song lyrics for Arcade Fire, in a song called Sprawl 2, Mountains Beyond Mountains. And
they paid for us to say this, by the way.
Yeah. Like, seriously, just look it up. And like, that's the only use that this phrase comes up. And if that's the only use of it, then shouldn't we kind of use that context in order to understand it and debate about it? And that song is all about how like suburban sprawl bad.
What's sprawl?
Suburban.
What's sprawl?
Sprawl? It's just the spreading, the boundaries of suburbia, expanding more and more and more, taking up more square footage, square mileage. What I mean? You're just paving over nature and stuff like that.
So what do you advocate for like eliminating chunks of population, or how do you stop that?
Stop granting building permits.
Yeah.
Where do people live?
Build up, or also make fewer of them, right?
What about viruses? That's conducive to viruses as well.
Good, fewer humans, right? No, so poor timing. I don't know. It's been a year. It's been long enough. So quit these pretend. I would go in the avenue of like defunding think tanks and funding like nonprofits that are actually affecting the things that the think tanks are researching. I think like they're honestly, even like various disease or research institutions. I think there are a lot of research institutions that are just really awful capitalist fronts. Like they don't really make any progress
on the
charge insane amounts all the time. And, just to say that like, oh yeah, we get these donations. They are a tax shelter. And meanwhile, they just like pay their researchers, 7 figures to not really accomplish anything. But it feels like they're doing great stuff. And then meanwhile, reallocate that money to a cause that actually impacts what they're supposed to be researching.
And on the neg, you get up and you look at Tim and you go, look, you are stifling innovation. Sure, there's some abusers. Yeah. Okay, there's some people who abuse. But we are the cornerstone of innovation. and we need to push like no one's ever pushed to get these viruses under control and all these other problems we got.
And that's where I think there would be a genuinely fun debate because you get to like back one side or another. But I think that's a fair ground to be laid out in a debate like that.
There's always ground.
All right. Hey, we only got 1 second left, but what would you do on this one? I like this one's funny.
I would just, take all the money from this company and you guys like right now.
So I would have fun with it, and I would go like the Ultron route, or basically a million supervillains and like D-Dev, because now you've got a really good justification for like, yes, destroy all of the things that humans have created because we're the worst, and
because we're destroying the Mother Earth.
Sure. Yeah. So I would say like, yep, this is how we're gonna act like a supervillain, and why that's great. Like
suburban sprawl.
Won. Like we should have reset, or pick whatever superhero you actually were on board with their shtick. Like the Joker, right? Like, nah, anarchy is the only way. Tear down like all rules.
Oh yeah, man, you could just pick one supervillain, go for it, and Joaquin Phoenix is the Joker.
Superman is who I'd go with.
That would be an awesome one. Is like, okay, and you talk just about mental health.
Yeah.
Oh my God! Wow,
that'd be so fun.
I
think that would be cool because like more and more as of late, supervillain arcs are getting better and better. Like writers giving backstory and good reasoning behind evil plans are getting better and better. And I think like you just pick one and run with it. They're like, yeah, they had a lot of merit. They probably should have won.
Hey, Resolved, this episode is officially coming to a close.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. We are done. We had Tim Seavey from San Diego State, Visolutions. We got Matthew Shapiro, Esquire, and I'm Jared Kabuka Miller, your debate coach. We will see you next week, everybody. All right. Have a nice.
See you, Nolan.